Good evening. My name is Pastor Tilden Fang with New Beginnings Community Church. And on behalf of our senior pastor, Herman Hamilton, and in recognition of our multi-year partnership with Garfield Community School in Redwood City, led by Principal Lupe Torres Khalil, and our partnership with Santee Elementary in San Jose, led by Principal Maria Reyes, I want to welcome you tonight to our webinar entitled After Uvalde, Facing Our Fears, Supporting Our Children.
Buenas tardes. Yo soy la intérprete para el pastor Tilden Fang. Él dice, me llamo Pastor Tilden Fang con la Iglesia Comunitaria de Nuevos Comienzos. En el nombre de nuestro pastor principal, Herman Hamilton, y en reconocimiento de nuestra asociación de varios años con la Escuela Garfield en Redwood City, dirigido por la directora Lupe Torres Khalil, y con la Escuela de Santee en San Jose, dirigido por la directora María Reyes, les brindo la bienvenida a nuestro webinario, Después de Uvalde, enfrentando nuestros miedos y apoyando a nuestros hijos.
Presenting tonight are Dr. Christine Coleman, PhD and licensed marriage and family therapist, and Dina Barron, licensed clinical social worker. They also happen to be daughter and mother, and this webinar reflects their heart as volunteers and volunteering their time to be a practical help to the many families in the Bay Area, including in our church community and in the communities of Garfield and Santee, who have been deeply impacted by the school gun violence and the loss of life in Uvalde, Texas. As Dr. Christine and Dina present, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in either English or Spanish, and they will address questions in a brief question and answer period towards the end of this webinar. And for those joining on Zoom, there's a link at the bottom where you can submit questions in the question and answer button. And with that, thank you, Gina, for your help with translation and hosting, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Christine and Dina.
Las presentadoras de hoy son la doctora Christine Coleman, doctorada, terapista licenciada de matrimonios y familias, y su mamá, Dina Barron, licenciada en trabajo social clínico. Este webinario refleja su deseo de las dos de ser una ayuda práctica para las muchas familias en la zona de la Bahía, incluyendo a nuestra comunidad de la iglesia y las comunidades de Garfield y Santee, las cuales han sido muy afectadas por la violencia armada y la pérdida de vida en Uvalde, Texas. Mientras la doctora Christine y Dina presentan, si ustedes tienen cualquier pregunta, pueden mandarlas en inglés o en español durante el periodo breve de preguntas y respuestas hacia el final del webinario. Y si están con nosotros por medio de Zoom, este botón se encuentra abajo de la pantalla. Y ellas contestarán las preguntas. Gracias a Gina por la ayuda de traducir y facilitar el webinario. Y ahora les doy la palabra a la doctora y a Dina.
Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. My name is Dr. Christine Coleman. I want to thank you all for being here with us this evening. Today's topic is going to be on After Uvalde, Facing Our Fears and Supporting Our Children. To start, just so you know the flow of things, I will be speaking primarily in English, and Dina will be taking on the Spanish portion. And so we'll be doing sort of a flip-flop to ensure that you're receiving the same material in both languages. To start, my name is Dr. Christine Coleman. As mentioned, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, speaker, and consultant. I also wanted to add that I am a mother as well. I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. I live in Oakland, California. Dina Barron, who is also my mother, and I'm so pleased and honored to do this work with her tonight, is a licensed clinical social worker, also more primarily a mental health therapist. She's a mother of me, I'm the only one, and is in Fremont, California.
Sus presentadoras del taller hoy es la doctora Christine Coleman, doctorada y licenciada en matrimonios y familia, y también es consultora de presentaciones, terapeuta, y muy importante, es madre de 2, niños de 4 años y 2 años, y vive en Oakland, California. Yo soy Dina Barron y soy licenciada de Trabajo Social. He trabajado como terapeuta de salud mental y soy la madre de una adulta que es ella y vivo en Fremont, California.
To ensure that we have a time together that feels emotionally safe, psychologically safe, again, we know that this is a heavy topic to be presenting to you all and bringing us together in community about. We want to make sure that we have a few agreements we can abide by. Okay, so to start, we want you to uphold what is confidential, meaning that there'll be some information here, right, that you're going to want to and maybe even feel led to share with your communities and your loved ones. But if someone throughout the chat or maybe perhaps during some sharing shares something really personal about themselves, we want to make sure that we don't share that personal information with others. So we're going to uphold what is confidential. We also want to ask you to, lost my screen there for a moment, show up authentically. We're all here because we have children we care about deeply and we care about our communities. And so when we're able to ask the hard, vulnerable questions, to share our hearts, that is asking us to show up authentically within ourselves. We're ultimately here to create an emotionally safe space with each other. Therefore, we want to respect each other and their experiences as well as their opinions. Lastly, what this is, again, is a safe, inclusive, supportive, and educational space. What this is not is an opportunity or time to be judgmental. It is not a time to be defensive, and this is also not any form of therapy.
Queremos repasar los acuerdos de comunidad. Queremos mantener la confidencialidad, mostrar ser auténticos al compartir quizás a veces experiencias difíciles y lo que trae en su mente y su corazón. Crear un espacio seguro para poder compartir nuestras emociones en una manera segura. Y eso incluye demostrando respeto a las experiencias y opiniones de los demás. Lo que este taller ofrece es que queremos que se sienta seguro, incluido, y vamos a compartir información educativa. Lo que este taller no ofrece es la crítica, I can't see the slide completely.
La defensiva.
No poner a personas a la defensiva y no es terapia.
So very briefly here, the objectives for tonight, what are we really going to dive deep into? First, dealing with fear, anxiety, and grief in the wake of trauma. We're going to then move into creating safe environments for kids to share their emotions, how to speak with our kids about traumatic events, such as the one that we're navigating now, as well as ending with healthy habits for emotional and physical well-being. And hopefully we have time for some of your questions and answers as well.
Los objetivos de este taller son lidiar con el miedo, la ansiedad y el dolor a raíz del trauma, crear ambientes seguros para que los niños compartan sus emociones, cómo hablar con nuestros hijos sobre eventos traumáticos, hábitos saludables para el bienestar emocional y físico de adultos y niños, y terminaremos con preguntas.
Okay, so again, we know that there are people from all over. Hopefully many of you are behind a screen where you're able to share a bit about yourselves so we can get to know you and also what you're holding in this time together. So if you can briefly write your name, where you're from. We shared, I'm in Oakland, my mother is in Fremont. And also one thing that you're eager to learn today. And we'll just give a few seconds for you to type that in. So your name, where you're from, what you're eager to learn today.
Por favor, comparta su nombre. Si puede escribir eso en el chat, de dónde eres, qué te gustaría aprender durante esta sesión y si pudieran compartir eso, nos ayudaría a orientarnos un poco más a quién es nuestra audiencia. Vamos a dar unos 2 minutos para que tome tiempo, si puede, para escribir eso ahí en el chat.
All right, we're waiting for those. Hi, Michelle. Michelle's from Sunnyvale, interested in how to protect your children from the fear that these events create. Thank you, Michelle. Hello, LC from San Jose. You'd like to learn how to talk to elementary school children about these events that are happening so often. Yes, absolutely, LC. Thank you. Thank you, LC and Michelle. Anybody else out there? Hi, Andrea. How to talk to teenagers about the mass shootings. Thank you for that. Hi, Keith. Watching from Generations United in, okay, Redwood City. Wonderful. Thanks for being here, Keith. Hola, Patricia. Patricia is de Redwood City, Garfield. Patricia wants to know how to protect our kids. Absolutely. Gracias, Patricia. All right. Thanks, Keith, for dropping in those names as well. Hello. I'm probably not going to be able to get through all of these. We want to make sure that the rest of you who are here in community get to know who's here and also know all the things that you're holding in your heart, right? We want to make sure that we honor those and bring them into the top of this space. Go ahead, Dina. Go ahead and chat.
Gracias por compartir. Esta información nos ayuda, pero también si les da a ustedes una idea de lo que están guardando en sus preocupaciones, en su corazón, de estos eventos que han ocurrido, y estamos aquí en comunidad para apoyarnos.
Okay, great. Keep those coming. And also, to begin, another reflection question for you. And please drop this in the chat if you feel comfortable doing that. I already see some feelings and some concern coming through. That makes complete sense. A lot of this is coming for the children that you serve or children of your own, right? But a question for you, adults who are in this space, when you learned about the tragedy at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, I felt blank. So I'm going to encourage you to drop a feeling word in our chat box. What was something you felt when you heard about this on the news initially?
Estamos pidiendo una reflexión de cómo se sintió cuando escuchó sobre la tragedia en Robb Elementary. Y si pudiera escribir allí, cuando me enteré de la tragedia en Robb Elementary, me sentí una palabra que exprese cómo se sintió.
So I'm seeing anger, broken, devastated, shocked, sick. Yes, I see that. Powerless. Thank you for keeping these real feelings coming.
Me sentí devastada, en shock, con coraje.
Patricia says triste, sad. Absolutely, Patricia. Thank you. Thank you for bringing those up. Absolutely. So some hard feelings, right? Some hard feelings that we're navigating as adults, and also continuing to do our best to show up for the kids that we love, that we care for, right? So based on a lot of the questions and a lot of the concerns that you already put in the chat box, let's start with our first objective here, which is really understanding fear, anxiety, grief, and trauma. How do we even begin to understand and touch on those things? Some of you already are familiar with some of these terms briefly at a high level. Some of you know them very well, maybe based on other things you've navigated personally throughout your life. For the sake of our time together and in connection with this collective grief, we'll talk about that in a moment, this collective tragedy that's impacted all of us in one way or another, we're going to break these down to explore just a moment, especially in relation to the children that we serve and love. Trauma by definition is a serious event that causes a person to fear for their life or their safety. Can you drop a 1 in the chat box if you've ever experienced any sort of trauma? Again, this is a safe space to let us know that. And trauma shows up in different ways, right? Sometimes it's an event that we feel for a few moments and then it, gradually fades. Sometimes our experiences are much greater. It's hard to shake off. And sometimes the effects are really long lasting and can actually impact our everyday lives. Thank you for dropping those 1s in there. We see you and we honor you. Collective trauma. Collective means think of everybody. right? As a society, as a community, where we are exposed to something and we feel that in one way or another together. That's essentially what we're navigating now. The psychological reactions to a traumatic event that affect an entire society, right? So sometimes I find that, especially when I facilitate workshops, it's helpful to name things. What is that? What is that I'm feeling? What is that I'm experiencing? Some of you might say, oh, that's trauma. Oh, collective trauma. I've never heard of that term before. Yes, all of us are feeling these very similar things. That's because we're collectively experiencing this. A layer further is secondary traumatic stress. Have you ever heard of that term before? Something otherwise might also be known as vicarious trauma or similar to that. It's an indirect trauma, right? We were not there at Uvalde. We are not, maybe, hopefully, many times not there to experience mass shootings or something of that magnitude. But we feel the experience, we feel that in our hearts. We feel scared, we feel shocked. We might have some traumatic effects, even if they're short-lived, right? So they can occur when we are exposed to difficult or disturbing images. Believe it or not, we can even have secondary traumatic express when we go on our social media and see them, hear the stories, watch the news. Sometimes, maybe even unconsciously, we stay glued to the news. We keep on, I know for me, I was like, get off your phone for a minute, decompress, but I also felt myself going back to, because I felt so deeply touched and worried and affected. So that's secondary traumatic stress.
Primero queremos empezar para entender qué es trauma y queremos quebrar la definición en algunos puntos para que mejor entiendan cómo funciona el trauma. El trauma es un evento grave que causa a una persona que tema por su vida o seguridad. Y a veces en nuestra vida hemos pasado por algunos traumas en nuestra historia personal. Si usted ha pasado por algún tipo de trauma, si puede indicarlo señalando un 1 en la caja de chat. Estamos en seguridad, no vamos a dar detalles, pero si usted ha pasado un trauma en su historia personal. Entonces, el trauma es un evento, como decimos, grave que causa a una persona temer por su vida o seguridad. Otro tipo de trauma es un trauma colectivo, donde tenemos reacciones psicológicas a un evento traumático que afecta a toda una sociedad. Y usualmente afecta a la sociedad más cercana donde ocurrió el trauma. El tercero es estrés traumático secundario. Y el estrés traumático secundario es más indirecto. Y esto puede ocurrir cuando estamos expuestos a imágenes e historias difíciles o perturbadoras de segunda mano. Y esto nos podemos relacionar porque vemos las noticias, lo leemos en línea, lo escuchamos en radio, los detalles de lo que ocurrió en Uvalde, y nos impacta. Y a cada uno nos impacta quizás en maneras diferentes, a diferente intensidad, pero sí nos ha impactado en una manera secundaria, de segunda mano.
Great. Thank you. And thank you again. We want to honor you and thank you for sharing your ones in the chat. We hope again that you are feeling connected to this information and also knowing that you are incredibly brave for sharing. Let's move into just kind of understanding some of the effects of trauma and some of even the effects of something like a secondary trauma or vicarious trauma, right? So what do these emotions sound like? How do they show up? Oftentimes they show up as fear, right? The fear is danger is here now, right? So we're looking around and almost navigating our everyday lives, especially after we have exposure to some sort of trauma that we see on the news or we're exposed to throughout various forms of media, or maybe our even community goes through on site, right? So danger tells us it's here now, I'm scared, I'm worried. Anxiety says the danger is not here, but it's close. And oftentimes these stories are secondhand, right? So I often define anxiety as the fear of the unknown. And sometimes we also can consider anxiety as an increased level of worry, right? So I'm worried about something that hasn't happened yet. Danger is not really in my face, but my thoughts are preoccupied with worry. I wonder what's going to happen. And anxiety can, and it, we have to be careful with it, can sometimes affect how we navigate everyday life, avoiding certain places, being afraid to go to certain things. Fear, right? Fear and anxiety can drive us. What happens when those start to occur more deeply? We can start to become triggered. And I know that sometimes even in our social lives, we have these sort of really important mental health words to describe really serious things to be used as buzzwords. Some folks I hear, especially young folks, which is, that's okay, saying I'm triggered, right? But what does triggered really mean? Right? Triggers are everywhere. They are a result of those traumatic effects, the traumatic events. They result sometimes in the effects and how we navigate our lives. The other day I was at the zoo and I heard a really loud slam. Someone was closing a dumpster and it made this really loud noise and it startled me. And unfortunately, I admit that I got scared for a moment. I was like, do I have to react quickly to protect my children? Right? That is a very real and honest example of a trigger. And triggers often happen fairly close to when the traumatic event happened. But if you notice that the triggers are ongoing and the time that you're experiencing the triggers are much long after the traumatic event, that might be an indicator that you might need to seek more professional help. So some examples of triggers with the topic that we're talking about tonight: your car backfires, right? Boom, you hear a loud noise. There's another shooting, maybe in your neighborhood, maybe on TV, and you're stimulated again to act in fear and live in anxiety. Or maybe you're in a crowded place and you're kind of looking for exits. I have a lot of clients who tell me that, right? I find myself looking for exit strategies and thinking about what would I do if I was in danger. That's what we're navigating in everyday life. Lastly, here, collective grief. Grief together after a tragedy. So this is the part that I think is so tender. It's so fragile, but it's also an opportunity to be very empowering. We grieve together after a tragedy for the families, for the victims. And we also grieve because what is grief? It's a loss, right? So we yearn for, we long for the way that things used to be, right? Remember the time I told my mom this, she's here right now, right? Mom, I don't remember having to ever be scared of that when I was in school, right? So these are the things that we're navigating in real time. But as we continue to think of strategies and ways to help, I want to offer you this. Coming together as you're doing tonight is an opportunity and an important step in our healing.
¿Cómo nos afecta? ¿Cómo nos afecta el trauma secundario? Causa que nuestro cuerpo esté en guardia máxima, está en alta alerta. Y una manera es el miedo, el temor. El temor dice que el peligro está aquí ahora y nos sentimos con mucha dificultad en respirar o estamos muy sensibles a ruidos. La ansiedad dice que el peligro no está aquí, pero está cerca. Y cuando ocurre un evento traumático que está más alejado de nosotros, quizás decimos, no sé lo que está pasando, pero algo puede pasar. Y cuando las personas están en máxima guardia, los factores que activan el temor están en todas partes. Parece que están en todas partes porque estamos muy sensibles. Por ejemplo, si un auto falla, escuchamos un ruido, nos estremecemos. Al escuchar quizás por la televisión, como lo hemos hecho estos días, que hubo otro tiroteo, también nos ponemos en alta guardia, nos preocupamos. O estamos en un lugar lleno de gente, quizás nos preocupamos que quizás algo puede ocurrir. Entonces, nuestro cuerpo está en preparación. Es una manera protectiva, ¿verdad? De protegernos, pero también nos pone muy nerviosos, quizás no dormimos bien, y entonces eso nos afecta. El duelo colectivo. Bueno, este es algo que junto con el miedo, la ansiedad, nos sentimos tristes, ¿verdad? Nuestro corazón está quebrado cuando escuchamos que lo que nos afligimos por las víctimas y por sus familias. También nos afligimos por la forma en que nos gustaría que fueran las cosas en nuestra sociedad, ¿verdad? Volver a nuestras rutinas, a ir al cine sin temores, que nuestros niños vayan a la escuela sin tenernos que preocupar. Nos da tristeza que ahorita la situación es que sentimos que no podemos hacerlo. Entonces a este le llamamos duelo colectivo, porque aunque la intensidad de cómo sentimos esto varía de persona a persona, a todos nos ha impactado. Entonces, ¿qué hacemos, verdad? Bueno, un paso es que reunirnos es un paso importante en atender a nuestro bienestar. Y esta noche les queremos brindar algunas herramientas que creemos que van a ser, que les van a ser de ayuda para saber cómo vamos a manejar esto. ¿Ok? Entonces son unas herramientas muy básicas porque no tenemos mucho tiempo, pero las vamos a repasar y esperamos que les sean de ayuda.
Right. If you're still there, drop a 1 in the chat so we know you're still with us. Si todavía están aquí con nosotros, pon un número 1 en el chat para saber que todos estamos aquí. Muy bien. Ahí están. Here you are. Perfect. Okay. Heavy information, but here we are. We're navigating through it together, right? So let's get into creating safe environments for our children to share their emotions. That's why many of you came. That's what many of you mentioned at the top of our time together. Here's some really basic, but I think very essential and important tips for you to walk away with. And I always encourage you to take notes, right? To write them down in your own words so they really feel applicable to you. Help, right? And if you notice, each word that starts with each sentence here is an action item. I want to highlight that. We're taking action here to be able to implement into our everyday lives. We want to help our children feel safe, right? So that might mean hugs, right? Nurturing appropriate touch for our kids. Some of your teenagers might say, don't touch me, mom, don't touch me, teacher, right? But if you can just let them know, hey, I'm here. This is the tough time we're navigating together. Even a really gentle physical touch can go a long way, especially when fear and anxiety are at the top of our minds. Talks. This is going to be really important, and we'll get more into this in the next slide too. Talking is going to be really essential because we know what happens at school, even with small kids. Somebody is hearing about this news and they're going to pass it on to their friends and they're going to have their own interpretations. We as adults want to guide them and talk to them not only about how they feel, which is important, but also about what's really going on to help them maneuver this really heavy information. We also want to reassure them that, yes, this is scary, heavy news, and we'll talk more about how to do that in just a moment. But we want to reassure them that I am the adult here. I am here to protect you. I know there's some teachers and caregivers here as well. Reassuring the children that you serve and are in community with to let them know that these are really heavy topics. And yes, it's scary. We're validating them, but we're also reassuring them that we are doing everything we can to keep this school, this environment, this community safe for you. There are certain things you just don't have to worry about. Keep playing, keep being a child, keep being an adolescent, right? That can be so grounding for children because if they're receiving information from their peers, if they're seeing things on the news and their little brains or maybe their developing brains cannot process it all, they really can't, right? We can bring them back into a place that feels safe in their emotions as well as in their environments. We want to share, right? What is going on in an age appropriate way? So some of you are here with younger children. Some of you are here serving teenagers. Think about the terms that you can use. And you know that because you talk to them every day, right? What is an age appropriate way to share this information? So maybe the way you talk with your adult communities is not going to be the same. It shouldn't be the same, right? As when we talk to a 5-year-old or when we talk to a 10-year-old. We want to say the things that are going on, right? It was something really scary and tragic happened at that school. What do you think about that? How is that affecting you, right? And we know also that kids might not share what's on their mind, but you also want to pay attention to how are their behaviors shifting, right? Or is there anything that we need to pay attention to a bit more deeply and meet them there where they're at? We want to also prevent or limit news coverage, right? And that goes also for adults in the home too. If you're stuck to it and you notice your kid might be playing around, but they hear stuff, right? They hear stuff. They're very in tune to what's going on. That might mean that you have only certain moments where you're tuning in And you also want to make sure that you maybe have some family or community agreements around how much information from the news or social media you're taking in. If you have a child who has access to a phone or internet, maybe even in your school settings, you also want to make sure that you are aware. And that might take a little bit of extra effort, but these are the measures that we're going to take as a community to ensure that our children are not exposed to things, especially if they're really tragic or even traumatic in methods of information. Another important step here is to maintain routines, right? When uncertainty happens, especially, or when a traumatic event happens and we're all experiencing those things, we already expressed it, it puts us in pause, right? And it kind of shifts everything around us. And sometimes routines for adults can be hard to maintain, but for children, they're essential, right? They feel safe in their routines. So bedtimes, right? Lunch times, meal times, reading times, time together as a family, fun time, right? Those are going to be really essential to invite normalcy into their lives again. And also encourage your children to do fun activities. Again, when collective trauma or collective grief hits, it's like a cloud that follows us. And we know that because we have felt that. Many of you already shared that. But for children of all ages, you want to encourage them to spend time with friends, to do things that are fun. I encourage you to also have that fun be in different forms aside from screen time, right? Get out in nature. Generally, the weather is pretty beautiful now. So can you do things that engage in other things that are fun, that bring joy and laughter?
¿Cómo crear ambientes seguros para que sus hijos compartan sus emociones? El primer paso es ayudarlos a sentirse seguros, ¿verdad? Por medio de un abrazo. A los niños pequeños van a dejar que los abracen, los adolescentes quizás no, pero palmearlos, ¿verdad? En la espalda, indicándoles, aquí estoy, estoy contigo, ¿verdad? Entonces, eso es muy importante, un toque, ¿verdad? Físico, si es apropiado, entonces, eso nos puede ayudar a sentirnos más calmados. Charlas, hablando, ¿verdad? Abriendo oportunidades para pláticas es también algo que si los niños sienten que hay esa oportunidad para hablar, entonces quizás les cueste abrirse, no lo hagan de inmediato, pero pueden saber que cuando necesiten hablar, allí está usted presente. Y claro, en situaciones como estas, tragedias, asegurarlos, ¿verdad? Usted conoce a sus niños, a sus hijos mejor. ¿Qué es lo que les causa a ellos sentirse con más seguridad, ¿verdad? Darles algún complemento, sacarlos a caminar, lo que ustedes han identificado como padres, como personas que cuidan a esos niños, a esos adolescentes. ¿Qué es lo que les ayuda a sentirles más tranquilos, que les da seguridad? Y entonces, otro punto que es muy importante es compartir lo que está pasando, no ocultarlo. A veces queremos ocultarles lo que está pasando, pero ellos se van a dar cuenta porque otros niños hablan, comparten por redes sociales. Entonces, lo mejor es que ellos lo escuchen de usted y que usted lo comparta en una manera apropiada para la edad de ellos. Y lo que es importante es dar la información, ¿verdad? Quizás no en mucho detalle y, como dije, que sea apropiada para la edad de ese niño. Claro, unos niños pequeños no les va a dar muchos detalles, ¿verdad? Pero ellos se van a dar cuenta que algo ocurrió, entonces ustedes les pueden decir si algo difícil ocurrió, es algo que nos ha afectado, es algo que fue peligroso, pero estamos aquí, tú estás seguro, aquí estamos contigo, ¿verdad? Siempre asegurarlos que usted está allí manejando la situación. Algo que es muy importante es impedir o limitar la cobertura de noticias, ¿verdad? Cuando escuchamos algo, nos inclinamos a querer los detalles, lo estamos escuchando quizás en las noticias, en televisión, leyendo en redes sociales. Y los niños, aunque no estén allí de inmediato, están escuchando, se están dando cuenta. Ellos tienden a reaccionar a cómo nosotros nos estamos sintiendo. Entonces, trate de limitarlo, porque eso no nos ayuda cuando estamos repitiendo esa información, parece que no termina y los niños se recuperan mejor si saben que algo es pasajero, ¿verdad? Y a veces en la televisión las mismas noticias se repiten. Así es que tenga mucho cuidado de limitar la cobertura de noticias. Mantenga rutinas. Cuando algún trauma, tragedia ocurre, nos desequilibramos porque pausamos para escuchar qué pasó. Quizás lo estamos platicando con otras personas, adultos, y podemos dejar nuestras rutinas. Y como adultos, las rutinas son importantes para nosotros, pero especialmente para los pequeños, para los niños, los adolescentes, mantener rutinas de tiempo para comer, tiempo para dormir, son importantes. Para ellos les aseguran de que la vida sigue, de su seguridad. Entonces, tenga cuidado de mantener esas rutinas. Otro punto muy importante, a pesar de lo que ocurre, que nos preocupa, que nos impacta, anime a sus hijos a hacer actividades divertidas. Eso es muy importante, ¿verdad? A veces también como adultos nos sentimos tristes, preocupados, pero si podemos también hacer algo divertido, nos ayuda a crear un equilibrio emocional. Así es de que haga planes para que sus hijos mantengan actividades divertidas, salir a un parque, a ver alguna comedia, a jugar con sus amiguitos. Eso es muy importante.
Great. So we're going to think just a bit further here, right? What are some actionable items that you're going to do to help you prepare to speak with your kids or our community, our children in our communities about these traumatic events, or maybe when traumatic events hit us, right? We want to think about first picking a good time to talk, right? And something I think I'm learning as a new parent myself is to give my kids a bit of space and time. And I think sometimes there's this unspoken idea that we are the authority figures, therefore everything they do has to be on our clock. But sometimes we also have to meet our kids where they are, right? So for example, I tell my kids, they're watching a show or they're playing a game. Okay, 5 more minutes, wrap it up, right? That way I'm not just like interrupting in the middle of it. Similarly, we want to think about what they navigated at school that day, what emotion they're in, what emotion you're in, right? What did you go through a stressful day and now you want to talk about this stressful thing? Probably not, right? So thinking about yourself and what mindset and heart set that you're in, as well as paying attention to where your child is or where the child is that you're going to be talking to. Maybe again, if you're a caregiver or a teacher or an educator of some sort, and you want to have these conversations, it's important to think about a good time to talk with them that feels tender and soft, and also that you'll be able to hold them in that space. Talk again, we're going to repeat this in simple, age-appropriate language. And sometimes as adults, we tend to want to over-explain or give a lot of details. But for traumatic events, we want to be very succinct and specific to not cause more fear in children, but also to hold that space for them that feels honest, right? And also something that's easy to understand, right? So we might want to keep it really high level. Yes, something really terrible happened. Did you hear that from your friends, or did you see that on the TV? Right. Yes. Children were hurt really badly. Something really terrible happened in that community. What's going on for you in that? Oh, you feel scared to come to school? Tell me more about that. Yeah, I feel scared sometimes too, right? Empathizing, meeting them where they are. But we're not just going to sit there. We're not just going to stay there with that fear or even with the feelings, because all of us have feelings, but we also want to make sure that, especially for ourselves as adults, and especially for children, we want to reassure their safety. So that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, right? We want to reassure them that we are their protectors and their caregivers, right? Even if our emotions are not fully intact, we do have to kind of show up and set those on pause. Doesn't mean that you minimize them or put them away, but as adults, we want to reactivate our ability to protect and show up for them to reinsure their safety. And we'll talk about what you as adults can do to take care of yourself in just a moment. Tell them what you're feeling. Again, without the specifics, right? We're not going to talk to them the way we would talk to our peers, but we are going to tell them what they're feeling. And then you can help maybe have a dialogue about, what do you think about that? You know, mommy is feeling really sad that this happened. I am sure that their families are so sad. What do you think about that? Oh yeah, mom. Oh yeah, teacher. That's really, really sad and terrible. I feel a little scared about that too. Okay, I know that you're feeling scared and you know that I'm feeling sad too. Let's be together. Let's spend a few extra minutes together. Do you want to color? Do you want to talk more? Do you think we can go for a walk after school? Would that be something we can look forward to, right? Clear up any misunderstandings. Again, we're activating our adult, mature mindsets, right? They're going to hear stuff, they're going to see stuff. And especially if your children are a bit older, they might talk real fast. They might be exposed to their own set of news on social media. But we want to be able to receive them and be a holding space and a grounding space for them. Even if they're 17, 18 years old, they're still in many ways children who need guidance. And we want to be able to clear up any misunderstandings. We also want to be able to listen to them without lecturing, because sometimes we can go there and that's really not the time to do that. We want to listen empathetically, but also give space for them to talk, and also just leave an open door, right? Number 8, say, you know what, maybe you don't have the words right now, but I want you to know I'm here. This is a hard thing we're navigating collectively. You can use that word, you can use together, but I just want you to know I'm here. And check in often, because oftentimes, and you know this, sometimes our adult friends do this. Yeah, I'm here for you whenever, right? And then we move about life. And that's, you know, that's what happens. But with something that's traumatic, children, we think they forget because they're playing and we see them engaging in other things. But when it's really scary, whether they say it or not, right, it could live there still and it can navigate their little minds and their little hearts. And so we want to check in often. Doesn't mean we have to revisit it entirely, but hey, remember that conversation we had the other day about that terrible thing that happened? Do you want to check in about that again? Right? Making sure you're consistently not overdoing it, but checking in with them often.
¿Cómo hablar con nuestros hijos sobre eventos traumáticos? Esto es muy importante, como hablamos hace unos momentos, crear un ambiente seguro, pero luego cómo hablamos con ellos, ¿verdad? Entonces, primero hay que elegir un buen momento para hablar, ¿verdad? Si ellos llegan cansados o han tenido un día difícil fuera en la escuela o usted ha tenido un día difícil en su trabajo, está cansado, esos no van a ser buenos momentos para una plática de este tema tan fuerte, ¿verdad? Entonces, elija un buen momento para hablar que también se sienta muy natural, ¿verdad? Cuando estén sentados, que ya están más tranquilos, quizás puede ser un buen momento, ¿verdad? Hable de forma sencilla y apropiada para su edad de sus hijos, hijas, ¿verdad? Entre más sencillo, mejor, ¿verdad? Porque ellos están, aunque ya sean adolescentes, hay que no darles muchos detalles, no dar nuestra opinión en mucho detalle, ¿verdad? Entonces, en forma sencilla, quizás hacerles la pregunta, ¿ha ocurrido tanto? Me siento triste, es algo muy difícil. A ver, ¿tú cómo te sientes? ¿Verdad? Para un niño más pequeño, decir, han ocurrido algunas cosas que no son buenas, y estoy un poco triste. Y a ver, tú al escuchar esto, ¿cómo te sientes? ¿Verdad? Entonces, siempre seguimos a abrir ese tema con asegurarles, ¿verdad? Que aquí estoy, usted es el adulto, ellos son los niños, los adolescentes, entonces es su parte asegurarlos. Aquí estoy yo, ahorita estamos seguros, pero también quiero dar oportunidad que hablemos como familia o tú y yo, que hablemos de lo que ha ocurrido. A ver, ¿qué piensas tú? ¿Cómo te sientes? A veces ellos van a tener otra manera de ver las cosas y usted quiere saber, ¿verdad? No podemos asumir que ellos van a decir, sí, yo también me siento triste, ¿verdad? Pero escúchelo y, y déjelos que ellos tengan sus sentimientos o sus pensamientos sin juzgarlos. Ayúdelos a aclarar sus pensamientos, ¿verdad? A veces quizás los niños un poquito más grandes, no los muy pequeños de 4 años, ¿verdad? Pero ya más grandecitos están pensando muchas cosas, quizás están un poquito confundidos. Ayúdeles a aclarar qué es lo que están pensando. A ver qué piensas. Si le dicen, bueno, no sé, o salen con algo muy allá, ayúdelos a aclarar. A ver, dime un poquito más qué significa eso para ti. Entonces también el número 6 es aclarar cualquier malentendido de lo ocurrido, ¿verdad? A veces reciben información de sus amiguitos o de algún lugar donde no es algo muy cierto. Entonces es muy importante tratar de aclarar cualquier malentendido, ¿verdad? Se va a acabar el mundo o algo así muy exagerado. Usted quiere aclarar, esto ocurrió aquí, ocurrió en este lugar, nos damos cuenta, es algo muy difícil, pero aquí ahorita estamos seguros. ¿Ok? Y escucharlos también sin sermonear, aunque queremos aclarar los malentendidos, hay que escuchar sin juzgarlos, ¿verdad? Ellos tienen, sin tratar de convencerlos, pero sí proveerlos con información que les ayuda a aclarar. Dejar una puerta abierta, ¿verdad? A veces ellos no quieren hablar, ay mamá o papá o maestro, lo que sea, no, yo no quiero hablar de eso. Ok, respete eso, pero deje una puerta abierta. Aquí estoy. Si tú en cualquier momento quieres venir a hablar conmigo. Y el número 9 es mantente informada de cómo están. Quizás ellos no lo van a expresar en palabras, pero usted los conoce bien. Observa que no están durmiendo bien, que no están comiendo bien, que están más inquietos. Manténgase informado de cómo están. Pregúnteles cómo están. Yo sé que ya han pasado días, pero aquí estoy. Quiero asegurarte que aquí estoy. ¿Cómo estás? Si le dicen no sé o no quiero hablar, respételo, pero eso les vaya a ayudar a ellos a sentirse seguros que usted está al tanto de su bienestar.
Great, everybody. So I'm mindful of the time and I want to make sure that we have enough time for a few questions. I see already popping up and I know we had a few submitted in advance. So with a short amount of time left together, I'm going to ask you all to bear with us as we run through these fairly briefly, okay? If you'd like to take a picture of them, there'll also be a recording up, we'll do that. But essentially, healthy habits for emotional and physical well-being for adults and children. So these are to take away for your children, but also for yourselves, because again, you're showing up a lot for your kids as you should, and be able to decipher this is not age appropriate, this is not child appropriate, and this is, but what do I do for myself, right? So we're going to ask you and encourage you, take care of yourself first, right? Putting on your mask first, like you do on a flight. We want to pour into ourselves, have our own communities, have spaces like this where you pour into yourself. Eat well balanced meals, limiting sugar and other processed food that really do affect our moods. Once in a while is good and makes us feel happy, but to really maintain a well-balanced meal is key. Rest and sleep, right? We want to make sure that we rest and restore our bodies. Exercising, I often like to say moving our bodies. Maybe you're like, I don't like exercise, but can you move your body? Can you stretch? Can you dance? Can you go for a walk? Maybe some of you do like to go to the gym. Avoiding alcohol and drugs, everything in moderation. But when we start to have more and more of alcohol and drugs, it can impair our functioning in multiple ways. Take breaks and have fun. Like we just said with our kids, it's also important for adults to do the same, engage together or have some time away for your children to recharge and have a good time. This is really important here. I love this. Do the opposite, right? Do a healthy action so doing the opposite of what you feel like doing. So if it's like, oh, I really am just feeling so sad, all I want to do is just eat this ice cream or this big jug of ice cream, sounds good in the moment, but we also have to think about, oh, I'm going to feel really bad afterwards, or I just want to isolate myself and make it all go away. That might feel like what you want to do, but instead we want to take a healthy action, right? I'm not going to eat this. I might have a little bite and then I'll go have something that's more fulfilling to me in a healthy way. I might feel like isolating, but what I really need to do is call a friend and say, hey, do you have a minute to talk? I'm feeling really down. Avoid taking on commitments that add more stress. So this is going to be really intentional boundary setting. Understand that we process emotions differently. We mentioned that in kids, but we also process things differently as adults. So being mindful of yourself and being mindful of others. But the key here is processing. We don't want to avoid, we don't want to numb, because that takes us to a darker place. We want to make sure we're processing these things in our own time. Be proactive and find ways to help. This is the part where we say, I don't know what to do. Can you volunteer somewhere? Can you look at your school and say, I feel helpless. I want to help with something. Find ways and maybe even create opportunities to help and be actionable, especially in the wake of tragedy. One I would love to just highlight throughout this whole time, if you take anything away from today, remember, especially for your children, but also for you too, it's possible, right, that a mass shooting or some level of that trauma is going to happen. We're seeing it happen at unbelievable rates, right? But it's not necessarily probable, right? So probable is much lower. We see it because we're exposed to it a lot, but the probability of a mass shooting or other equivalents of trauma don't actually happen. So yes, it's possible, but it's not probable. We want to take that same language to our children. Lastly, focus on safety and security. We've been talking a lot about safety and security this evening. We want to make sure we lean into those factors to make sure we feel safe emotionally and physically, and we pass it on to the children in our lives.
Hábitos saludables para el bienestar emocional y físico de adultos y niños. Se nos pasa el tiempo, pero brevemente vamos a repasar estos, ¿verdad? Lo primero es que si usted se cuida bien, puede tomar mejor cuidado de sus hijos. A veces queremos cuidar a todos y somos los últimos para tomar cuidado propio, pero usted se tiene que cuidar para poder estar ahí y estar fuerte emocionalmente, físicamente, para apoyar a sus hijos. Entonces, cuídese bien. Coma comidas bien balanceadas, ¿verdad? A veces cuando tenemos estrés, tendemos a comer cosas dulces o no muy saludables. Mantenga eso en mente y trate de hacer lo mejor que pueda. Descanse y duerma. Mantenga rutinas para descansar y dormir, ¿verdad? Eso se nos afecta o nos ocupamos con otras cosas, pero especialmente en tiempos difíciles tenemos que apartar tiempo para descansar y dormir. Haga ejercicio, no nomás en el gimnasio, pero mueva su cuerpo. Eso nos ayuda a despedir tensiones físicas. Evite el alcohol o las drogas, ¿verdad? A veces sin pensar las personas tienden a quizás tomar un poquito más. Entonces, eso no ayuda a manejar el estrés, la tensión cuando somos impactados por las tragedias. Entonces, mantenga eso en mente. También usted, como sus hijos, tome descansos, diviértase, ¿verdad? Eso nos ayuda con nuestro equilibrio emocional y también físico. Haga lo contrario, una acción saludable de lo que usted apetece hacer, porque a veces decimos, ay, no quiero levantarme, no quiero salirme de la cama, ¿verdad? Esa es una acción no saludable, y hacer lo contrario sería, no quiero levantarme, pero lo voy a hacer, ¿verdad? Aunque sea un poco, me voy a dar ánimo para hacer alguna actividad. Entonces, haga lo contrario de lo que apetece hacer con una acción saludable. Evite asumir compromisos que sumen más estrés, ¿verdad? Ponga límites. Si puede posponer algo, pospóngalo, pero no posponga algo que después le va a causar problemas y dar más estrés. Okay. Comprenda que cada individuo procesamos las emociones de manera diferente. Entonces, con estas tragedias, unas personas dicen, lloré mucho, otras personas dicen, yo no sentí mucho. Okay. todos somos diferentes, hay que respetar. No quiere decir que no somos impactados de una manera u otra. Sea proactivo y encuentre formas de ayudar, ¿verdad? Que habrá algo que pueda hacer con nuestros hijos, podemos darnos de voluntarios en algún lugar cuando ayudamos a los demás. Eso nos ayuda a sentir que hacemos una diferencia y ayuda a nuestro sentido de bienestar. Recuerde, lo posible no es lo probable. En situaciones así, cuando sentimos que estos tiroteos están ocurriendo frecuentemente, entonces eso seguramente va a ocurrir aquí. Bueno, es posible, puede ocurrir, pero no es 100% probable en este momento que eso está ocurriendo. Entonces nos ayuda y también debemos enseñar a nuestros niños que cuando tenemos temor, ansiedad, a recordarnos, ¿verdad? Respirar profundamente, decir, en este momento lo que estoy observando, lo que estoy viendo es que nada ocurre. Estoy rodeado de personas que me quieren o personas que me apoyan o la casa está tranquila, nada ocurre, estoy seguro, ¿verdad? Y entonces respirar y relajar los músculos. I'm going to say this part in English. As Dr. Christine mentioned, what is possible is not 100% probable, but we may feel that way, like we're very close to the danger of shootings. So what can be helpful to us in moments like that is to ground ourselves in the moment, in the now, and repeat to ourselves, what I'm observing, what I'm seeing is that I am safe in this moment. Nothing is happening. I'm not in danger. And we want to teach that to our children. We want to take a deep breath, relax our muscles, and repeat the same thing to ourselves. I would do it a little bit more, but we're short on time. But that helps us, right? Release that tension and reassure ourselves that in this moment, I am safe. We can't manage yesterday or even an hour ago. We can't manage 10 minutes from now, but we can manage this moment in terms of how we create a sense of safety. And so we want to, once again, nos queremos centrar en la seguridad y protección de hoy. Gracias.
Thank you. To end here, everybody, thank you so much for your time. Really quickly, our team is going to drop in a free resource. I created this months ago for families. It's a family connection guide. You can click on the link in the chat box. We'll also have it available otherwise. It gives you just different examples of ways to engage with your family. And it's also not limited to families. You can apply it to the children you serve. So I'm offering that as a gift. All you have to do is click on it, enter your email, and then you'll receive it in an email form. We want to, Mom, I want to say that real quick.
Sí, tenemos un guía de recursos gratis y está allí el link para que se puedan conectar.
So we're closing up our time together. I'll check in with the team to see how we're doing with Q&A. I could stay a few extra minutes if you can, Mom, but not much. So just checking in here, what are you taking away from today's discussion? And if you are still here with us, drop in some reflection here in the chat box. What are you taking away? Even one thing from today's discussion.
Una reflexión, ¿qué es lo que puede llevar de la charla de hoy, la presentación de hoy, que le puede ayudar? Y si lo quiere escribir ahí en el chat, gracias.
We want to thank you again. Thank you, NBCC. Thank you to the two schools here, as well as other community members who are here with us. We are in this together, right? This is a community effort. Here is my contact information. Again, if you want to take a picture of this, my email, website, also on Instagram if you want to connect there, and my LinkedIn. Thank you also to the team for dropping that in the chat box. So I'd love to continue to stay in touch with you, and I'll hand it over to our team to see how we feel about questions.
So I'm going to suggest that maybe we tackle just one or two questions very quickly. And then we'll call it a night. And thank you so much, Dr. Christine and Dina. I'm just so grateful for you're sharing your expertise with our community. One question that came to us from Principal Maria Reyes was that, she's fielded questions from parents who've said that, their children are scared of going to school and have asked to not go. How would you assess whether or not to have kids go to school if they are feeling scared and hesitant to go?
I'll go ahead and ask that in Spanish. Es una pregunta que viene de la directora María Reyes, que se expresa que cuando mi hijo o hija dice que no quiere asistir a la escuela porque tiene miedo, ¿qué deberíamos hacer?
Mom, do you want to go?
Dr. Christine, you want to take that?
Yeah, gosh, that's first of all just a sad reality. I just want to vow that's a very sad reality that our children are navigating, and I'm sure it touches many of our hearts. I think that two things go hand in hand here. First, we want to ensure that our child is feeling safe and grounded overall, because again, we're talking about this particular tragedy at Uvalde and this topic of mass shootings, but we also don't know what the child's entire circumstances are. So we want to make sure we have that in mind, but we also, for what it's worth, again, going back to the tools you received tonight, right? Talking through it, validating, okay, yes, it's scary. It is a scary time, but we know that our teachers and the staff are going to be there to make sure that you're safe, right? So we're reassuring them. If you want to do something fun after school, that will be something that we can do together. So giving them something to look forward to ensure, okay, I'm going to be safe in the here and now. And I'm also have access to my caregiver afterwards. And I have something exciting to look forward to help them kind of reframe and not stay entirely focused on the devastation, if you will. So I'll pause there if you want to add anything, Dina.
Yes. Entonces, dar validez, ¿verdad? Que el niño se siente con temor, está llorando, dar validez, como dijimos, escucharlos, asegurarlos que es algo difícil, y luego también asegurarlos que, no sé, ¿verdad? Cada niño es diferente, si se quedaron el primer día o fueron a la escuela, los quiere asegurar que usted está allí, sus maestras, el personal en la escuela está allí para apoyarlos y mantenerlos seguros, y vamos a hacer el intento de que vayas. Cuando el niño ya va y vuelve a su rutina, eso le puede ayudar. Y también decir, cuando regreses, mira, vamos a enfocarnos en una actividad para disfrutar, para recreación. Y entonces, paso a paso, yo no digo que rápido se les va a quitar el miedo, pero volviendo a su rutina de ir a la escuela, van aprendiendo que sí lo pueden lograr y que en ese momento, en ese día estuvieron seguros y que ahí están el personal de la escuela, ahí está usted, y ellos vuelven a sus rutinas como hablamos anteriormente. Entre más sigan con esas rutinas, eso les puede ayudar.
All right, wonderful. And I'm going to end on one last question, just really quick to get some feedback. We had one question that was submitted, which is, if your student child isn't talking about the tragedy, is it better to let it be or should you bring it up?
Si su hijo o hija no está hablando de la tragedia, ¿es mejor mencionarla o no?
So I can go ahead and answer this quickly. Again, we're going back to our tools, right? What we learned about today. I think that's absolutely valid. And we also know that children process things in different ways. And we also know that not all children, especially developmentally, have the words. And even older children don't always have the words. And so what we're doing is we're opening the door. We're giving opportunity to share. We're letting them know that we're here. We don't always have to nudge at them or tell them, talk to me, right? But letting them know this was a really scary thing. I want you to know you're not alone. I want you to know I'm here to talk to you about it. You might want to even offer what was mentioned earlier. I'm really feeling super down about this today, and I feel scared sometimes too. What helps me is talking to my friends about it. And you're saying that as an adult. What do you think helps you? And that just might be an open door for them to say, oh yeah, sometimes I just kind of like to read a book, or maybe I just kind of like to go ride my bike or something. And then you go, okay, cool. If you ever want to continue that conversation, please know I'm here. And then we do the check-in again.
Sí.
Wonderful.
Como, hablamos anteriormente, no tenemos que forzar o tratar de forzar a nuestros hijos que hablen del tema, pero si sí mantenernos alertos, ¿verdad? Como dijimos, algunos cambios, porque ellos procesan las cosas diferente, ¿no? A veces no tienen las palabras o no lo están pensando en el momento, pero sí estar pendientes y decir, a ver, ¿cómo estás? ¿Quieres hablar? Si dicen que no, ok, no insista, pero sí mantenerse observándolos de a ver cómo están y usted también compartir un poquito, pero no tiene que forzar el tema.
So with that, I'm going to bring this time to a close. I want to thank Dr. Christine Coleman and Dina Barron again. Thank you so much for serving our community in this way. I want to also thank Gina Covello for your translation help tonight. Gina's company is Habla Language Services at hablals.com. And if you're more interested in more information about our church, New Beginnings, you can find us online at nbccbayarea.com. This webinar will be available in the next few days on our church's YouTube channel and social media. Dr. Christine may be sharing it through her social media as well. And so if you know of anyone who would be blessed by this webinar, we hope you'll find it and share it. And we hope that this has been a blessing. Gina, do you want to offer that translation?
Sí, muchas gracias por participar esta noche. Si quieren tener más información sobre la doctora Cristina Coleman, ya dimos su sitio web en el chat. Y gracias a la intérprete Gina, gracias por su ayuda en traducir esta noche. La empresa de Gina se llama Habla Language Services, Servicios de Idiomas. Sí, su sitio web también está en el chat. Si tiene más interés en nuestra iglesia New Beginnings, Nuevos Comienzos, estamos en línea y está en el chat también. Y vamos a tener este video disponibles en unos días por YouTube y también por las redes sociales.
Thank you and good night. God
Muchas
bless you.
gracias y buenas noches.